Hello, I'm Maurice Powell. Welcome to A Little Like Music, Manx Radio's regular Thursday evening classical music hour. I'm going to start with a piece of Chabrier. Now, I did play a major piece of Chabrier a couple of weeks ago, I think. A vibrant, fantastic Spanish piece called España, perhaps his best-known orchestral piece. This is the overture to a tiny little one-act operetta called A Useless Education, which I have seen. It was actually done at college, back in the day, as they say. It's very, very funny. There's not much chance of seeing it. It has been recorded. It's basically, it just has three characters in it. Two young newlyweds and an old tutor who basically tries to kind of tell them what to do, but it's absolutely hopeless. Eventually, of course, they find out exactly what to do and all is well. But it makes for a very amusing sort of hour or so. Lots of little in-jokes and things like that. The music is absolutely delightful, complete contrast to that splendid orchestral piece we heard before. So here's the overture then to Chabrier's operetta A Useless Education.
nous voilà arrivés. Entre, ma petite Hélène. Quel horrible temps.
Well, the sparkling overture there to Chabrier's little operetta, A Useless Education, and we just heard the first of the three main characters there just before we finished. So, and now to the music of Gluck, Christoph Willibald Gluck, no less. He was, along with Mozart, Salieri, and a few other composers, one of the most important composers of opera in the second half of the 18th century. His prestige was enormous. He was kind of honorary court composer. He eventually retired and died around 1887. Mozart knew him, but Salieri was really Gluck's protege, and Salieri owed a good deal to Gluck's influence, particularly for getting commissions to write wonderful operas in France. Mozart never quite had that relationship with Gluck, but he did certainly revere him, and as I say, his reputation was absolutely enormous. One of the operas that this reputation relies on, of course, is Orfeo, written in 1762, and thought to be really a real breakaway from the old-fashioned kind of opera seria of sort of Handel, Vivaldi, that sort of period. In other words, Gluck was aiming for a much more realistic presentation of the incidents on stage, and in this he succeeded, and in many ways paved the way for composers like Mozart and Salieri, and in fact all those that came after. His operas are not performed very often today. You would have to go a long way to see one, but they are recorded, and magnificently in many cases, and they're well worth exploring. Now, I'm going to play a short piece. It's simply called Melody, but originally it was the Dance of the Blessed Spirits from this opera, Orfeo. It comes in Act 2, where Orpheus is in Elysium searching for Eurydice. It's a bit of a tragic opera, really, because he does find her, but unfortunately she dies. I'm playing this piece because it was one of the pieces played by the great violinist Fritz Kreisler when he made his one and only visit to the island in the 1930s. I think it was 1934, and he played at the Villa Marina before a huge audience which listened in rapt silence. He played a 2-hour programme, a little bit unusual, a little bit sort of classical and highbrow for the island, really. It included a Beethoven sonata, a Mozart violin concerto, some other pieces by Ravel, and of course some encores. Schön Rosmarin particularly was called for. But he did play this little Gluck melody. So a wonderful occasion, much reported in the press at the time, but he only came once. Never mind. So here we have Gluck's melody in an arrangement for violin, of course, played for us this evening by Midori. A lovely piece there by Gluck, an arrangement of the Dance of the Blessed Spirits from his 1762 opera Orfeo, played for us there by Midori. And now to Brahms, and something from one of his symphonies. Brahms' symphonies are justifiably popular, of course. He wrote 4, really from the sort of the middle part of his life onwards. There are no early symphonies of Brahms, or if there are, he destroyed them. He was a great destroyer of his own music, unfortunately. It's known that a lot of early pieces that he later became dissatisfied with, he simply destroyed. 1 or 2 were rescued and have proved to have been very well worth listening, but he was very harsh in judgment of his own music. So there may have been other major orchestral works that we know absolutely nothing about. I certainly hope not. It's the sort of thing that keeps me awake at night. But the 4 symphonies that he did write are a mixture. They're not sort of heavy German, heavily scored symphonies. Some of them, in fact most of them, have much lighter movements in amongst them. And the first symphony is no exception. I'm going to play the 3rd movement. It's called Allegretto e Grazioso. In other words, not too fast and gracefully. Starts off with a lovely clarinet melody. There's no doubt Brahms struggled with this first symphony. He first made sketches for it in the 1850s, but it wasn't performed until the mid-1870s. The truth of the matter is, Brahms was very wary of being compared unfavourably to Beethoven. In many ways, the ghost of Beethoven haunted Brahms for most of his life. And it took him a long time to sort of pluck up the courage, if you like, to launch a symphony of his own onto the world. And he was right, because some silly critics did nickname Brahms' First Symphony as Beethoven's 10th. I mean, it may sound an amusing thing, but it's absolutely meaningless, and it no doubt upset Brahms considerably. First Symphony is a very powerful work, and it's also one of the longest symphonies that he wrote. However, this Allegretto e Grazioso is a delightful little interlude that comes partway through this symphony. A lovely, relaxing, serene movement there from Brahms' First Symphony. It's the third movement, Allegretto e Grazioso. Absolutely charming. It does, of course, get a little bit worked up, shall we say, in the middle, but then it comes back to that lovely clarinet melody at the end. I suppose it illustrates one of the things that I love most about classical music as opposed to any other kind of music, is that's the ability of composers to change moods so quickly from something quite dramatic to something quite peaceful or ethereal. Ah well. And now to a composer of light music that's never appeared in this series, I think in 5 years or so, William Hill Bowen. He was best known as a pianist, and he was a pianist principally for George Melachrino and his string orchestra in the 40s and 50s. But he also dabbled in composition. I'm going to play two short Parisian pieces here. First is called Paris Promenade, and the second is called Paris Metro. The music of William Hill Bowen. Two very perky and attractive pieces there by William Hill Bowen. As I say, a composer that's not appeared in this series before. I'll try and track down some more pieces that strike me as being, jolly pieces, very nice to hear. And like most light music, does not outstay its welcome. So if you've just tuned in, you're listening to A Little Light Music with me, Maurice Powell. You're very welcome. We started off the evening with a little overture by Chabrier. We've had some Gluck, Brahms, and as I say, William Hill Bowen, a not very well-known composer of light music, but clearly with a distinctive style of his own. Right, now on the 2nd of February in 1795, a remarkable thing happened. Well, I think it's remarkable because it was the premiere in London of Haydn's Symphony number 102 in B-flat. One of the finest of his late symphonies. Haydn made 2 visits to London in the 1790s, and they kind of cemented his name really all around Europe, which was very well known anyway. But it also made his fortune. He earned more money in 2 visits to London than for all his years working for the Princes of Esterházy before that. And of course, he wrote The Creation and The Seasons as a result of those visits. And of course, he took with him some symphonies for London and also composed some new ones. He wrote 12 in all, and they're known as a group as the London Symphonies. Now, for many people, the Symphony number 102 is simply Haydn's finest symphony. I wouldn't disagree with it, but the problem with Haydn is that whatever symphony I'm listening to, I begin to think it's his best symphony. He was extremely prolific. His music spread all over Europe. His symphonies were especially popular. But these late ones that he wrote for London are very special because he achieves the almost impossible, which is pleasing the critics, pleasing the public, the audience, and also pleasing his fellow composers. So they're a mixture of incredibly entertaining and witty, very erudite and learned, and as I say, the critics loved them. I don't think that's happened to any other composer since, except possibly Mendelssohn, who was also very popular, of course, in England. So let's hear the slow movement of the Symphony number 102 in B-flat, Adagio by Haydn. The slow movement Adagio from Haydn's Symphony No. 102 in B-flat major premiered in 1795. Now, I mentioned earlier that Brahms had been very wary about producing his first symphony for fear of being compared with Beethoven. Well, Beethoven had a similar problem with Haydn. Beethoven didn't produce his first symphony until 1800, which was 4 years or so after Haydn completed his last symphony. Beethoven had been Haydn's pupil for a short while. They simply didn't get on at all. And as I say, Beethoven was very, very wary, and he was unfortunate that with the popularity of, say, the Creation, Haydn's wonderful oratorio, Beethoven was always running into Haydn in Vienna, and they found that they were competing for the best players to play for their music. And on a number of occasions, Haydn beat Beethoven to the post, if you like, by hiring the best orchestras in Vienna for performances of the Creation, and Beethoven was left with the remnants, and some of his early performances were spoilt in that way. Beethoven resented it. He never had a good word to say about Haydn for the rest of his life, which was a pity. But there we go, Beethoven's Beethoven. Let's move on to the Fairer Sax. This is a saxophone group, 4 ladies, founded by 2 sisters in 1982. They made their debut in London at the Purcell Room in 1985. They were Anne Louise Lane, Gabrielle Lane, Karen Wiley, Valerie Stark, and they played all the sizes of saxophone in a wonderful quartet, and they made recordings and they travelled all over Europe. I have one of their recordings here of all sorts of wonderful arrangements of pieces. I have dipped into this disc before. So I'm going to play two short pieces. The first is by Jean Francais, French composer. It's a little polka, really, from his quartet for saxophones. And then I'm going to play the minuet from La Lysienne by Bizet in an arrangement for 4 saxophones. So music by Jean Francais and Bizet, the fairer sax. Two lovely pieces there played by the fairer sax, a little polka from his saxophone quartet by Jean Francais, and the minuet from Bizet's La Lysienne. Delightful stuff. And now to some Mozart. I'm going to play the finale, Rondo, from his third violin concerto, because this is another piece that the great Fritz Kreisler played here in the 1930s at the Villa Marina. I'm not sure he will have played the entire concerto. The reviews are not very clear on this matter, and it doesn't say whether he had an accompaniment for orchestra, which he could have done, because obviously the Villa had a very good orchestra, or whether he brought his own accompanist, as was probably more usual. Anyway, whatever. This is a delightful piece of Mozart, written in 1775 when Mozart was 19, a violin concerto, one of 5 that he wrote probably for himself to play. The Rondo from the Violin Concerto No. 3. The Rondo from Mozart's Violin Concerto No. 3. Not exactly an early work. Mozart was 19, but he was on the threshold there of his most illustrious period. All Mozart's music, even his earliest music, is very highly polished. I love the way he introduces there a local dance known in Salzburg as the Strasburger for some reason, into that last movement in a slightly slower section that must have pleased the audiences enormously. It was played for us this evening there by Simon Standage with the Academy of Ancient Music, conducted by Christopher Hogwood. The Rondo from Mozart's Violin Concerto No. 3. We might just about have time for a couple of pieces. Let's go for it. Ashworth Hope, not a composer you will have heard of, but you will know one of his pieces, Barnacle Bill, written in the 1930s and later made famous as the theme tune for Blue Peter on television. He was a successful solicitor in the north of England. He travelled in the Far East, but eventually retired to Somerset, where he had a huge music room overlooking beautiful countryside and wrote lots of attractive pieces. Barnacle Bill. Ashworth Hope's Barnacle Bill, and that really does bring us to the end of the programme. I hope you've enjoyed my selection. Please join me again next Thursday at 9 o'clock to play us out Ivor Slaney's Top Dog. Goodbye.